There is a quiet moment in some relationships when the whole power changes without a single loud word. An avoidant can look calm when someone is giving them love. They can look strong when someone keeps explaining, forgiving, waiting, and coming back. They may act like distance does not affect them. They may act like silence is their comfort zone. But when a super empath finally stops chasing, stops proving, stops reacting, and becomes emotionally still, the avoidant begins to feel a pressure they cannot easily explain. The old pattern no longer works. The person who once gave warmth is no longer available in the same way. The person who once understood every excuse now understands their own worth. And this is where the avoidant starts losing control, not over the empath, but over the emotional system they were used to. Avoidants are familiar with distance when they create it. Distance feels safe when they are the ones pulling away. It gives them space. It protects them from vulnerability. It helps them avoid deep emotional pressure. But avoidants are often not prepared for distance when it comes from the person who used to care the most. That kind of detachment feels different. It does not feel like normal space. It feels like access has been removed. The super empath's silence is not weak, it is not empty, it is not a game. It is the result of many moments of being patient, many nights of overthinking, many chances given, and many emotional wounds quietly carried. At first, the avoidant may think the empath will return to the same pattern. They may expect another message, another explanation, another emotional reaction. But when that reaction never comes, their nervous system begins to notice the absence. This video will explain why super empath detachment feels so powerful, why avoidants struggle to process it, and why calm silence can affect them more deeply than anger ever could. You will learn how avoidants protect themselves through emotional shutdown, why they often feel safe when the other person is still emotionally invested, and why the empath's final detachment breaks the hidden cycle. You will also learn why an avoidant may suddenly become curious, restless, regretful, or even irritated when the empath no longer feeds the connection with constant energy. This is not about revenge, it is about emotional reality. When a deeply caring person stops offering unlimited access, the avoidant is forced to face the one thing they were avoiding, the cost of their own distance. Stay until the end, because the final part explains why a super empath's detachment is not coldness, but self-respect, and why it can become the moment that reveals everything. Welcome to our channel, where we explore deep psychology, emotional intelligence, attachment patterns, and human behavior in a simple and powerful way. If you want more videos that help you understand people, protect your peace, and see hidden emotional patterns clearly, subscribe to the channel and stay with us until the end. The first thing to understand is that many avoidants do not pull away because they feel nothing. They pull away because feeling too much can make them feel unsafe. To other people, this can look cold, it can look careless, it can look like they are not interested. But inside the avoidant pattern, distance often feels like protection. Closeness can feel like pressure. Deep talks can feel like being trapped. Emotional needs can feel like demands. So when a relationship begins to require honesty, softness, presence, or real vulnerability, the avoidant may start stepping back. They may take longer to reply. They may become quiet after deep moments. They may avoid serious conversations. They may act busy. They may change the topic when emotions become real. They may use humor, silence, work, distraction, or indifference to keep the emotional temperature low. This gives them a sense of control. If they decide when to open up and when to shut down, they feel safer. If they decide when to come close and when to disappear, they feel less exposed. If they decide how much emotion enters the relationship, they feel like nothing can overwhelm them. But this control works only when the other person keeps caring. It works only when the other person keeps waiting at the door. It works only when the other person keeps trying to understand why they are distant. That is the hidden part of the pattern. The avoidant may seem independent, but the pattern still depends on someone else staying emotionally available. The avoidant pulls away, but the empath keeps the connection alive. The avoidant delays, but the empath keeps hoping. The avoidant avoids depth, but the empath keeps explaining with patience. This creates a quiet, emotional setup where the avoidant gets space without losing love. They get distance without losing access. They get freedom without facing the full cost of emotional absence. And for a while, this may feel comfortable to them. They may think the relationship is fine because the empath is still there. They may think silence has no effect because the empath keeps returning. They may think their distance is harmless because the other person keeps adjusting. But every time the empath accepts less than they need, the avoidant learns that withdrawal has no real consequence. Every time the empath forgives without change, the avoidant learns that closeness can be controlled without being truly entered. This does not always come from bad intent. Many avoidants are not sitting there planning pain. Many are reacting from old fear. They learned somewhere in life that needing people is dangerous, that expressing pain is weak, that love can become pressure, and that closeness can lead to losing themselves. So they protect their independence like it is survival. But in adult relationships, this protection can hurt the person who loves them. The empath may feel confused. One day the avoidant is warm. The next day they are distant. One moment there is connection. The next moment there is a wall. The empath keeps trying to find the reason. They wonder if they asked too much. They wonder if they were too emotional. They wonder if they should give more space, be more patient, speak more softly, or love more carefully. This is how the avoidance distance begins to shape the empath's behavior. The empath starts shrinking their own needs to keep the connection calm. The avoidant feels safer because less is being asked of them, but the relationship becomes unbalanced. One person controls the distance, the other person carries the emotional weight. This is why super empath detachment becomes so powerful later, because the avoidant is not just losing a person, they are losing a pattern that protected them from responsibility. They are losing the quiet comfort of knowing that no matter how far they pulled away, someone would still be standing there with open hands. A super empath often becomes the emotional safety net without noticing it at first. They are not just loving, they are deeply aware. They can sense fear behind silence. They can sense pain behind coldness. They can sense insecurity behind arrogance. So when the avoidant pulls away, the empath does not always see rejection first. They often see a wound. They think, maybe this person is scared. Maybe they need time. Maybe they were hurt before. Maybe they do not know how to receive love. This kind of understanding can be beautiful, but it can also become dangerous when it has no boundary. Because the empath may keep giving warmth to someone who is not giving emotional safety back. They may keep forgiving distance that keeps repeating. They may keep offering patience even when patience is turning into self-neglect. The avoidant begins to feel this warmth. They may not admit it, but they feel it. They feel the comfort of being understood without explaining much. They feel the relief of being accepted even when they are inconsistent. They feel the safety of knowing that the empath will not easily leave. The empath becomes the soft place they return to after they have created distance. The empath becomes the person who absorbs their silence, studies their moods, and tries to keep peace. Over time, the avoidant may become used to this. They may become used to receiving care without fully showing up. They may become used to being forgiven without deeper change. They may become used to emotional loyalty without emotional effort. This is where the connection becomes unequal. The empath gives emotional depth. The avoidant gives moments. The empath gives patience. The avoidant gives confusion. The empath gives safety. The avoidant gives distance. And still the empath stays because they believe in the person beneath the pattern. They believe love can soften the wall. They believe understanding can heal the fear. They believe if they remain kind enough, calm enough, and loyal enough, the avoidant will finally feel safe enough to open. But the painful truth is that love alone cannot heal a person who keeps choosing avoidance over awareness. Warmth cannot fix a pattern that the avoidant refuses to face. The empath may become an emotional home for someone who never fully moves in. The avoidant may enjoy the comfort of that home, but still resist the intimacy that comes with it. They may want the peace of being loved, but not the responsibility of loving with presence. They may want the empath's softness, but not the mirror that softness brings. Because real love asks for truth. It asks for communication. It asks for repair. It asks for emotional honesty. And avoidants often struggle when love begins to ask them to be seen. So they take the parts that feel safe. They take the patience, they take the forgiveness, they take the warmth. But when the empath asks for consistency, they pull back. When the empath asks for clarity, they get quiet. When the empath asks for emotional presence, they feel pressured. This creates a painful loop. The empath gives more to feel secure. The avoidant pulls back to feel secure. Both are trying to feel safe, but one is reaching and the other is retreating. The empath thinks more love will create closeness. The avoidant thinks more space will create peace. And in the middle, the relationship becomes a place where the empath keeps pouring energy into a connection that does not pour back enough. The avoidant may not realize how much they depend on that energy until it is gone. They may not realize how much calm the empath was giving them. They may not realize how much emotional labor was being done behind the scenes. The empath was reading between the lines. The empath was softening the tension. The empath was making excuses. The empath was holding hope. The empath was turning pain into understanding. This is why the empath's detachment can feel so shocking. The avoidant was not only attached to the person, they were attached to the emotional service the person kept providing in silence. The moment the super empath detaches, the whole emotional pattern begins to collapse. Not loudly, not dramatically, not with a final speech that explains every wound. It often happens quietly. The empath stops sending long messages. They stop asking why the avoidant changed. They stop trying to decode every delay. They stop proving that their love is real. They stop reacting to distance with panic. They stop offering warmth to someone who keeps giving coldness back. At first, the avoidant may not take it seriously. They may think the empath is just hurt for a while. They may think silence is temporary. They may expect the same cycle to return. They may expect the empath to reach out again, to explain again, to forgive again, to reopen the emotional door again. But this time, the door does not open in the same way. The empath is still kind, but not available for chaos. The empath is still aware, but not willing to carry the whole connection. The empath is still compassionate, but no longer self-abandoning. This is the shift that the avoidant cannot easily handle, because the empath is not attacking them. The empath is not begging. The empath is not chasing. The empath is simply no longer playing the old role. The avoidant used to create distance and still feel pursued. Now they create distance and meet silence. They used to withdraw and still feel emotionally important. Now they withdraw and feel the empty space they created. They used to delay and still expect understanding. Now delay becomes a mirror. They used to avoid depth and still receive warmth. Now the warmth has boundaries. This is why detachment breaks the pattern. The avoidance system was built around the idea that they could step back while the empath kept the emotional connection alive. But when the empath stops doing that, the avoidant is forced to notice the relationship without the empath's effort holding it together. And that can be deeply uncomfortable. They may start to wonder why the empath is no longer reaching out. They may check for signs. They may test the connection with a small message. They may act casual to see if the empath will return to the old emotional rhythm. They may become curious, irritated, or restless, not always because they are ready to love better, but because the familiar emotional balance has changed. The empath is no longer chasing. And for an avoidant who felt safe being chased from a distance, that can feel like losing control. The most powerful part is that the empath is not detached from hatred. They are detached from exhaustion. They reached the point where explaining became painful, waiting became heavy, forgiving became empty, understanding became a prison. They realize that being loving does not mean being endlessly available to someone who refuses to meet them halfway. So they stopped feeding the cycle. They stopped giving emotional rewards to emotional absence. They stopped treating potential like presence. They stopped confusing fear with love. And now the avoidant has to face a version of the empath they did not expect. A calm version, a centered version, a version that no longer needs answers to move forward. This is often more powerful than any argument because the avoidant cannot blame it on drama. They cannot say the empath is too emotional. They cannot say the empath is pressuring them. They cannot say the empath is demanding too much. The empath is doing less, not more. And that less says everything. It says the empath finally sees the pattern. It says the empath is no longer trying to earn basic respect. It says the empath has stepped out of the emotional game. This is the point where the avoidant may begin to feel the weight of what they took for granted. Not because the empath is punishing them, but because the empath is no longer protecting them from the natural result of their own distance. Silence can hurt an avoidant more than anger because anger still carries heat. Anger still carries contact. Anger still tells the avoidant that the other person cares enough to fight, explain, and demand a response. Even when anger feels uncomfortable, it can still confirm that the emotional bond is alive. If the empath is upset, the avoidant may feel pressure, but they also feel wanted. If the empath is crying, the avoidant may shut down, but they also know they still matter. If the empath is asking questions, the avoidant may feel trapped, but they also know the connection has not ended. This is why many avoidants can handle emotional reactions better than calm detachment. Reactions can be avoided, delayed, minimized, or blamed on the other person being too sensitive. But silence cannot be managed in the same way. Silence gives them nothing to push against, no argument to escape, no complaint to defend against, no long message to ignore and still feel powerful, no emotional storm to label as too much. The super empath's silence is different because it is not a weak silence. It is not confusion. It is not waiting in disguise. It is a silence that comes after clarity. It is a silence that says, I no longer need to convince you to value me. That kind of silence feels final. It carries a weight that anger does not. Anger says, I am hurt and I still want you to understand. Silence says, I understood enough to stop asking. Anger says, I am still inside this cycle. Silence says, I have stepped out. For the avoidant, this can be deeply unsettling. They are used to their own withdrawal being the main force in the relationship. They are used to being the one who decides when emotional access opens and closes. But when the empath becomes silent, the avoidant meets a boundary that does not need permission. The empath is no longer waiting for them to feel ready. The empath is no longer standing in the emotional hallway. The empath is gone from the old place. This does not always mean physical absence. The empath may still speak politely. They may still respond with respect. They may still behave maturely. But the emotional overgiving is gone. The extra softness is gone. The endless explaining is gone. The anxious energy is gone. And the avoidant can feel the difference. They may not name it, but they feel it. The air changes, the bond feels less available. The empath's words become shorter, their energy becomes calmer, their attention is no longer centered on the avoidant. This is where silence becomes louder than anger, because it tells the avoidant that the emotional supply has stopped. The empath is no longer giving them proof of devotion through pain. The empath is no longer showing love by suffering openly. The empath is no longer allowing the avoidant to feel important through their reactions. That can feel like a loss of emotional status. It can make the avoidant feel unseen in a way they did not expect. Before, even their absence had power because the empath reacted to it. Now their absence creates no visible panic. Before, silence belonged to the avoidant. Now silence belongs to the empath too. And that changes the whole power of the relationship. The avoidant may begin to feel the same uncertainty they once created. They may wonder what the empath is thinking. They may wonder if the empath still cares. They may wonder if the empath has moved on. They may wonder if they pushed too far. The same distance that once made them feel safe now begins to feel uncomfortable because it is no longer under their control. This is why calm detachment can feel so intense. It does not attack the avoidant, it simply removes access. And for someone who relied on the empath's emotional openness while giving limited openness back, that removal can feel heavier than any fight. When the super empath detaches, the avoidant may begin to feel emotions they worked hard to keep away. This does not always happen at once. Many avoidants first respond with pride. They may act like the silence does not matter. They may tell themselves they wanted space anyway. They may distract themselves with work, entertainment, friends, or routine. They may convince themselves that the empath was too intense, too emotional, or too demanding. This helps them stay protected for a while. But if the empath's detachment remains calm and consistent, the avoidant's inner defense can start to weaken. The absence becomes harder to ignore. The quiet becomes harder to explain away. The avoidant begins to notice that the person who once carried the emotional connection is no longer carrying it. This can create confusion. They may not understand why they feel uneasy. They may not understand why they keep thinking about the empath. They may not understand why the silence feels different from the space they usually wanted. This is because the empath's detachment removes the avoidant's usual escape route. Before, they could pull away and still trust that the empath would keep the bond alive. Now, pulling away leads to actual distance. Before, they could avoid emotion and let the empath hold it for both of them. Now, the empath is no longer holding it. The avoidant is left with the feelings they refuse to process. Regret may appear, but it may come disguised as irritation. Curiosity may appear, but it may come through small tests. Fear may appear, but it may look like coldness. Longing may appear, but it may be covered with pride. This is why avoidance can seem confusing after detachment. They may reach out, then pull back. They may act interested, then become distant again. They may watch from a distance. They may send a casual message to see if the emotional door is still open. They may test whether the empath still reacts. But the real discomfort is not only missing the person. It is facing the truth that their old behavior had a cost. They may begin to realize that the empath did not leave because they were weak. The empath left because they became strong. The empath did not stop caring because their heart was empty. They stopped overgiving because their heart was tired. The empath did not become cold, they became clear. This can be hard for an avoidant to process because it removes the story that helped them feel safe. It is easier to believe the other person is too needy than to admit you were emotionally unavailable. It is easier to believe the other person changed for no reason than to admit they changed because they were hurt too many times. It is easier to believe the bond was too much than to admit you gave too little. But detachment forces these truths closer to the surface. The avoidant may begin to remember the patience they received, the chances they were given, the softness they dismissed, the messages they ignored, the love they treated as always available. And now the same love no longer comes running. That can create a quiet emotional shock. The avoidant may feel exposed because the empath's absence reveals how much emotional work the empath was doing. Without the empath's constant understanding, the avoidant has to stand in the full result of their own choices. This does not mean every avoidant will suddenly change. Some will avoid the feeling again. Some will create a new story. Some will find another person who repeats the old pattern. But others may begin to feel the first real crack in their defense. They may begin to understand that independence without emotional honesty becomes isolation. They may begin to see that distance can protect them from pain, but it can also protect them from love. And that realization can be painful because it shows them that the person they feared getting close to may have been the person who gave them the safest love they had known. Super empath detachment is often misunderstood because people confuse silence with cruelty. But mature detachment is not revenge. It is not a plan to hurt the avoidant. It is not a trick to make them chase. It is not emotional punishment. Real detachment begins when the empath finally stops betraying themselves to keep the connection alive. It begins when they understand that love without boundaries turns into self-abandonment. It begins when they realize that being patient does not mean accepting repeated pain. The super empath may have tried for a long time. They may have explained their feelings with care. They may have given space. They may have lowered their expectations. They may have tried to love the avoidant in a way that felt safe for them, but at some point they see the truth. A relationship cannot be held by one nervous system. A bond cannot stay healthy when one person keeps disappearing and the other keeps repairing. Love cannot grow where only one person is willing to be emotionally honest. So the empath detaches, not because they stopped having compassion, but because compassion finally includes themselves. This is a major shift. For a long time, the empath may have used their gift of understanding to protect the avoidant from accountability. They may have explained the avoidant's behavior by pointing to fear, trauma, past pain, or emotional wounds. But self-respect begins when the empath can understand the wound without accepting the repeated harm. They can see why the avoidant pulls away, but they no longer volunteer to be hurt by it. They can care about the avoidant's healing, but they no longer make it their life mission. They can wish them peace, but they stop losing their own peace to provide it. This is not coldness. This is emotional maturity. The empath stops trying to heal someone who keeps running from closeness. They stop trying to prove that safe love exists to someone who keeps treating safe love like a threat. They stop giving endless access to someone who only values access when it starts disappearing. This kind of detachment has a calm power because it is not based on anger. Anger may have been there before. Pain may have been there before. Confusion may have been there before. But mature detachment comes after all of that. It comes when the empath no longer needs the avoidant to admit the truth in order to accept it. It comes when they stop waiting for closure from a person who keeps avoiding open conversation. It comes when they stop needing the avoidant to understand their pain before they protect themselves from more of it. And this is the part that avoidants often cannot handle. The empath is not trying to win. The empath is no longer fighting for a place in their life. The empath is simply choosing peace. That peace can feel threatening to an avoidant because it cannot be controlled through distance. If the avoidant pulls away, the empath does not collapse. If the avoidant stays silent, the empath does not chase. If the avoidant returns with small effort, the empath does not automatically reopen the same door. The empath has become grounded. They are no longer moved by mixed signals in the same way. They are no longer seduced by potential without action. They are no longer willing to confuse emotional crumbs with love. This is where the avoidant may feel the full power of what has changed. The empath who once over-explained now lets actions speak. The empath who once begged for clarity now creates their own clarity. The empath who once carried the emotional weight now puts it down. And this does not make them less loving. It makes their love cleaner. It makes their love wiser. It makes their love more honest. Because real love is not endless self-sacrifice. Real love has truth inside it. Real love has boundaries. Real love does not ask one person to disappear so another person can feel comfortable. The super empath finally understands that protecting their peace is not selfish. It is necessary. They understand that leaving a harmful pattern is not abandonment. It is self-rescue. They understand that someone can be wounded and still responsible for how they treat others. They understand that the avoidant may care in their own way, but care without consistency still hurts. So they choose a new way of loving, a way that does not chase, a way that does not beg, a way that does not keep proving worth to someone who keeps standing at a distance. And that is why super empath detachment affects an avoidant so deeply. It does not hurt because it is loud. It hurts because it is calm. It removes the emotional supply they were used to receiving. It removes the control they felt when they could pull away and still be chased. It removes the endless forgiveness that once softened every wound. It removes the comfort of knowing someone would always explain, wait, understand, and try again. The empath's silence becomes powerful because it is not empty silence, it is clarity. It is the sound of someone finally choosing peace over confusion. It is the moment the empath stops asking, why are they like this? And starts asking, why am I still accepting this? And that is the part an avoidant cannot easily handle. The person they thought would always understand them has finally started understanding themselves. The person they thought would always return has finally returned to their own self-respect. This is not revenge, this is not coldness. This is what happens when a loving person reaches the end of overgiving and realizes that love should not require self-abandonment. If you have ever seen an avoidant panic only after someone stopped chasing, comment below and share your experience. If this video gave you clarity, press the like button so more people can understand this pattern. Subscribe to the channel for more deep psychology, emotional intelligence, attachment, and human behavior videos. And share this video with someone who needs to stop explaining their worth to a person who keeps choosing distance over real connection.